Hello and welcome back to the series that takes the last month of meta-analysis and uses it to predict the future. This is the forecast. So in today's episode, we're going to be looking at the information from the October month of meta-analysis, using information from various WCQs, YCSs, all kinds of events, and compiling it into an analysis that will attempt to help us to predict what's going to actually happen in November. So typical format for the episode, let's just run through what we have. So for this month's data that we're working with, we've got a bunch of things going on. So we've got releases like Dual Devastator and Chaos Impact, which have happened over October. There was a ban list about halfway through the month, although towards the sort of first half if you're looking at the weekends and when competitive play actually happened, which was largely in line with our expectations from the previous episode of the forecast. We did expect a Mermaid hit, certainly a big hit to Orcust, so potentially a minor hit to Sky Striker showed up in the Widow Anchor form. The deck is still very playable, and then we've got some other various changes to the ban list. So the Agapane totally gone, Malicious back to 3, and a few other small things, but nothing that's super meta defining from that ban list, I think. Then we look at the WCQs where we have information. So we've got Glasgow, Bangor, London, the Sneak Attack regional net, the Bournemouth WCQ, Lincoln, Leeds and Limerick all contributing to this episode, as well as PPG Columbus, UDS Panama, and of course YCS London. So this is the kind of format that the data comes into this episode. So we have information about the event type that you can see there, where the event location actually takes place, the names of the players who made it into Top Cut, and we're only looking at Top Cut decks here, their final position, the deck that they played, and what date it was, and then just Top Cut breakdown. So very, very basic level stuff, but this is the kind of information that gets submitted by you guys to me so that I can build this into a fully fledged episode and give you the analysis that you guys deserve. So if you have access to any of this information from the upcoming month of November, then please do get in touch via the Facebook page or the YouTube channel. Let me know and we can compile this information into the next episode of the forecast. So if we look at the overall deck breakdown from this month, you can see, as kind of expected, Orcust is still very, very much in the lead. The Mermaid hit clearly not enough to put the deck out of commission. Salamangrate is a very close, well, I say close, is a reasonable second, taking only 13% of Top Cut spots from these lists that we've analysed here. I think it's one of the things where in the last month we saw it wasn't super popular because Orcust was really big, and the Salamangrate Orcust matchup isn't the best that has ever existed. So as we see a decline in Orcust, we see a strengthening in the sort of Salamangre side of things. Sky Striker down a bit, down to 11% for this month. You know, they did take that hit with the Widow Anchor to 1, but the deck is still very, very capable of making Top Cut, as shown here. Thunder Dragon still floating around there. While there's a format where Orcust is potentially the best deck, you don't expect people to move on to Thunder Dragon. The matchup is just way too weak in this situation. We do have a selection of unknown decks as well. Lunalight Orcust creeping in here, that's from the early events of the month, and then a few of the other random decks that have come into this. Then let's look at the impacts that Konami had in order to influence this, the state of the game to get to this deck breakdown that we have. So there was the release of Dual Devastator. Now, I wouldn't say that the impact on the sort of structure of the meta was super significant from this set. It's something that allows more casual players to come into the game and play a lot more, and that's something that we'll look at a little bit later. But overall, you know, there's no like major new release from this set. You got the one new hand trap and that's about it. Everything else is just reprints of stuff that the more competitive players probably already have access to, so it shouldn't have a massive impact on the Top Cut representation, and we didn't really see any changes to Top Cut representation immediately after its release. The other release was the Chaos Impact, which came out right at the end of the month, just before YCS London. This did have quite a strong impact on the way the meta shaped up. and we'll discuss it a little bit later when we get onto YCS London, but there were some really key releases in this, so IP Masquerena was one of them. There's some interesting stuff for Salamangreat that came out in the set, but it just got totally untouched, and all of the new archetypes, none of them made it into Top Cut so far. Potentially it's something that we could see as we move on to WCQs that happen afterwards, but from the October season, nothing from this set having a major impact, really apart from the IP Masquerena. Other than the product releases, we did also have the ban list, obviously. Came out shortly after the release of the last episode, and it did everything we expected it to. As already mentioned, it hit Orcust, it hit Striker a small amount, and then it freed up some extra space in terms of the sort of more rogue decks, which is really something you'd expect. You know, given the state of where heroes are with their previous support and all of the changes to the deck that have happened recently, you'd expect heroes to get that extra boon. So Stratos to 3, Malicious to 3 were kind of, they're the kind of thing where you could expect it to happen. There's no real driver for it in terms of technical play. It's not like the deck is super competitive at the moment, so it's just kind of from a product side of things. Konami will obviously want to sell more of the hero product, and they can do that by boosting up the ability of the heroes just by releasing Stratos and Malicious. So that's it for the Konami impacts. If we have a look at the deck breakdown here, so this is very similar to the chart that I showed off last time. I think this is probably the most influential and certainly easiest to understand in terms of what's actually going on. I'm just going to grab a laser pointer here so that we can follow along. So we start off this month with the Glasgow Regional very early on in the month. You can see Orcust, this orange line here. This representation of Orcust is super low because the pure version was just totally off the radar. Everyone was on the Lunalight Orcust strategy or the Cyber Orcust strategy or something else. And especially as soon as that ban list got announced, players realized that they wanted to stick to the more fun strategies, certainly until that took effect. So you can see from the early stages of the format, there's no clear dominance of Orcust. In fact, Lunalight Orcust does really well at the early stages. Move on to London Sneak Attack. We actually see Orcust ramp up in popularity. People started trying out the different variations of it. You can see some of the deck profiles from that event on my channel. This is still pre-ban list, so it is an event where it doesn't entirely indicate what's actually going on in the current format of the game, but it does indicate what's popular. You know, people invest a lot of time into learning different strategies, so if they're going to learn an Orcust strategy in the past, they may well take an Orcust strategy in the future to future events as well. We move on to then the Bournemouth, Lincoln and Columbus. These all took place on the same weekend, and you can see maintaining that very strong Orcust position, with Sky Striker also doing exceptionally well at this event too, and then carrying on, Orcust continues to do very well. We see a drop down post-ban list at least. This is likely due to people not having a fully realized plan of action after Mermaid goes. You know, you can't just throw tons of monsters into a deck and then summon Mermaid and combo off at this stage. So Orcust very briefly dipped in popularity just for the Leeds Regional, where we can see actually Thunder Dragon doing extremely well here. It was a very popular choice given that the deck is still super solid, hasn't been hit on a ban list. The only issue being that if you expect Orcust to be very prevalent, you can't expect Thunder Dragon to do very well. And additionally, I think Sky Striker was sort of pinged as one of the potential contenders for this format, and the Sky Striker Thunder Dragon matchup, it tends to be quite iffy, especially in a format with only one copy of Widow Anchor. We move on to Panama. Orcust rises back up, Sky Striker up too. Very strong representations for the two of those decks. And then continuing on to the Limerick Regional and YCS London, both taking place on the same weekend. You can see a much more diverse format here because we have a top 32 cut rather than a top 8. But that said, it's not, you know, it's not the most incredibly diverse set. We have a massive Orcust representation, 50% here. Salamangreat pushed up as well. That was pretty interesting. Into the top cut set. Not massive representation of the other decks, like the you see there's actually an Infernoid here, and there's like Sky Striker in there too, but it's not huge representation. I believe in top 8 of YCS London was just the one Sky Striker. So let's get a quick breakdown of YCS London. It is the event where I have the most information available. But this is obviously the kind of analysis that could be done for any event where we have enough information. So typical European YCS fashion, Other obviously takes the most spots going into round 1. I think this is one of the events where it actually takes slightly more than usual. So I want to come back to the release of Dual Devastator for this. Dual Devastator allowed a lot of more budget players to pick up competitive hand traps and competitive cards that make them feel more confident in what they can actually take to an event. So this is one of the few events where shortly beforehand we've had a release that allows less competitive players to take whatever their deck is and take it to a really highly competitive event, which YCS London generally is. Additionally, obviously, there's the Comic-Con aspect, so a lot of the other bracket could just be people attempting to go round 1, round 2, and then drop. But we look at the rest of the decks then. Orcust takes a significant portion despite being hit on the ban list going with the Mermaid going. People just realised that you could work with the deck in so many other variations. Salamangreat and Thunder Dragon moving into the second and third spots here. True Draco having really strong representation, and Sky Striker really pushed down. It seems like a lot of the player base were super invested in the power of Widow Anchor, so removing that from the deck means there's a lot less confidence in the deck, so it takes fewer top spots, fewer entry spots in round 1. Then Pendulum, Loonlight Orcust, and Autogeist. These are all pretty interesting. Loonlight Orcust was pinged as still being a viable deck, despite the fact that obviously Mermaid's gone. You typically just work through the Curious anyway, and you can resolve your Azathoth beforehand, so it should be fine. So that one's pretty interesting to me. There's actually less stun than I would have anticipated, but presumably is all fitting into this other bracket here. Let's just drop the laser pointer for now. And move on to the top cut. So, top 32, 50% Orcust, kind of expected based on representation and the ability of the deck, to be honest. It wasn't swarming the event, but it was certainly the highest represented meta contender for this event. We've got some interesting stuff in top cut: the Infernoid, the 2 Grand Magi, a few Sky Strikers and Thunder Dragons, and a significant Salamangreat portion. But we have seen more diverse top cut breakdowns in the past. So this is certainly not a one-deck format. However, if you look at the top 8 breakdown, you might suggest that, Orcust has a significant advantage over some of the other decks. Certainly we know it's incredible versus rogue decks, but when you get into top cut, it shouldn't have that much of an advantage. So it's a combination of weight and power of the deck that allows it to carry through into 75% of top cut, with one Sky Striker deck here and one Infernoid deck. That Infernoid deck does make it into top 4, which is pretty interesting. And obviously, Pascal taking Sky Striker to first place for this event. That's the top cut breakdown for YCS London. Let's take a look at a new segment for the second episode of the forecast. This one really interests me. So we have data points of all of the different decks from over the month. So I figured, why not plot all of these points onto a chart. Let's just see where they all lie for the previous month, and let's try and understand how decks are being influenced over the course of this month and potentially into the future. So, very simply, just chucking on some lines of best fit. So I'm going to bring back the laser pointer for this, actually. So this top line here, we can see is the Orcust segment. So Orcust steadily rising over the course of the month. It is not going down in popularity despite the existence of the ban list. Keep in mind this is based on UK WCQs, YCS events, and the events all previously mentioned. But what we can understand, Orcust gradually growing in popularity, potentially, given that there's not going to be a hit anytime soon, and we know how strong it is given the top cut representation at YCS London, this could be a really strong contender moving into November. And simple extrapolation of this plot would suggest that we're going to start seeing it pushing into the 30% or more bracket of top cut on average over the coming month. With Orcust gaining popularity, the Lunalight version of the deck, you can see this blue line here, is rapidly going down. Obviously, it started off being a viable deck. Now it's just it's not really considered by the general player base to be something that's playable. It I don't know whether that's actually a viable opinion that is happening. I don't know if it's correct to suggest that Lunalight Orcust just isn't a deck, but it's certainly a lot more fragile than the pure Orcust. The grind game is very, very difficult with it because you have so little access to resources. One thing that we've seen a couple of players using is the recently taken off the ban list Augusto Emerald. You can use that to shuffle back some of your resources, and because it's Lunalight Orcust, you have a lot of access to rank 4s, but it's not necessarily the best option. It's still quite limiting, and obviously your Emerald can be hit by a lot of hand traps. Let's take a look at some of the other decks. So Sky Striker, slightly dipping in popularity. This is largely due to the actual impact of Orcust and Thunder Dragon still being super popular. If Lunalight Orcust, being a more fragile deck, goes down in popularity, Sky Striker should also go down in popularity because it's one of the decks that hard combats the Lunalight Orcust strategy. However, it does have a very good pure Orcust matchup as well. So if pure Orcust carries on this upward trajectory, potentially we can see Sky Striker rising up again as well. I think it just got dropped down a bit because banlist hit and Lunalight Orcust gradually dropping off there. One more deck I want to take a look at is the Salamangreat. So very low popularity at the start of the month. It typically had a pretty terrible Lunalight Orcust matchup, or like Go Second Orcust matchup. As the month has gone on, Orcust has been hit. Players in the community have sort of considered that potentially Orcust isn't the best strategy for them to take on. So there's a lot of in the sort of, I'm going to call it the secondary player base. So this is not the top level competitive players, but the slightly below that players who go to a lot of regionals and win a lot of those and win a lot of top spots at regionals and that kind of level event. But don't necessarily make top cut at the larger events like the YCS London. So these aren't pro players, but they're good players. They're people with a strong technical knowledge. Now, if they look at the ban list and say Orcust is going to go down in popularity, that means that Salamangreat can creep into those top spots and take a lot more of the top 8 spots at regionals, certainly, and more top spots at larger events. It's still a very consistent deck, has an excellent rogue matchup, and if we look at YCS London, we saw 22% of that top cut was taken by Salamangreat. It's really not a huge surprise because the other portion of that event was so massive. If you're facing a field that is widely rogue, the fact that you can play a deck that has rage in it just allows you to get so many free wins and so much free value off there. Plus the fact that your deck is probably more consistent than their decks, and you can play hand traps which deal with a lot of it. So Salamangreat, a really good contender for any format that is particularly rogue, and that's why we can see it rising up here. Now you can see trajectories of some of the other decks as well. I don't think there's anything super important to mention. I guess Subterra has risen up a bit in popularity, and Thunder Dragon is sort of wavering around the middle, but most stuff, if it's rogue, you see dropping off when we go into the more competitive events anyway. So this is an interesting concept. Let me know if you like the way that this panned out, or what you think I should do towards this sort of concept of deck trajectories and how we should work with it in the future. Let's move on then to the top techs of the October season. So IP Masquerena, Chaos Impact came out. Loads of Orcust players starting playing IP Masquerena. It allows you to do some interesting combos where you use the harp during your opponent's turn to summon the symbol, then you link it off with the Masquerena so that you don't actually have to just use the symbol straight away. I think that's a really interesting option. Phantasme has thus crept into a lot of those decks because one of the most popular targets for Masquerena is Zerabrus, which will banish everything on the field if you trigger its effect by summoning something to the zone it points to. So if you have IP Masquerena on board and Phantasme in hand, and your opponent makes a link summon, you can banish everything on the field and put yourself in a super advantageous position given that most of your resources are in the grave anyway. DD Crow, very, very popular choice at YCS London and amongst the regionals that we've seen, some of the American regionals as well. This has been really popular. You can interrupt a lot of plays with this card. It allows you to cover a lot more of the format. If you're playing in a format where a Sky Striker is limited to one Widow Anchor, you can banish that one Widow Anchor if that's what you fear. Against Salamangreat, which we've seen an increase in popularity, this card is really strong, much stronger than Bell. and it's risen in popularity as Thunder Dragon has decreased. So if you ever see Thunder Dragon rise up, you can expect Bell to rise up as well. But given that this is a format where we've seen Thunder Dragon drop off and loads of graveyard manipulation decks like Sky Striker, Salamangreat, and Orcust being really popular, DD Crow should be like a go-to option. It's so versatile and it's so good, and you can it even has application in the Thunder Dragon matchup just for blocking chains from the Titan. So very strong contender, and it's reasonably cheap as well, so a great card to pick up if you haven't already considered it. Super Poly is something that we've seen a lot of players taking in, even within Orcust decks, Grandmagi decks, all sorts of different variants, whether you're OTKing or using it defensively. This is a card that is an amazing 6th card to draw, so it makes it slightly better than a hand trap in that respect. Also, your opponent can't respond to it. So this has been really strong over the course of October, and definitely something to watch out for in the coming month. Mind Control as well gets special mention here. So this was not super popular throughout October. It's something that's picked up popularity towards the end of the month as just a great contender in the Orcust matchup to steal monsters and then link into your own plays. Salamangreat, if you take the monster, you either bait a Roar or you save yourself from a Rage. So Mind Control has phenomenal application in this meta, and it's so good against rogue decks as well. A lot of people just don't seem to realize the impact that you can actually have with this one card in so many different matchups. So Mind Control, very popular card. I want to give special mention to Econ as well. As we've seen Salamangreat increase in popularity, Econ has gone back into the main deck for a lot of the lists that we've seen from that. However, it doesn't have the impact that Mind Control has when you're going second, so that's why I've included Mind Control rather than Econ within this top 5 techs for the format. If we look at some example decks that we've seen from the season, we've got 3rd place here from Dinkang Fam at YCS London. You can see it does include some of the techs we mentioned, so the Super Polys are in here, the DD Crows are in the side. So much hate for Graveyard here in the side deck actually. It's really cool to see. And Mind Control as well. This just has all of the techs that we mentioned. Apart from the Masquerena, he decided not to run that because you have reduced space when you're running Super Poly within the main deck. Move on to the 1st place deck from this event, Pascal Kim's Sky Striker. I just wanted to talk about this briefly. Given that Widow Anchor is now reduced in inability to be played, there's so much space within the Sky Striker main deck, and there are so few spells that are actually really good. People have started playing a lot more traps and the demise version of the build. This is also what we've seen in the American regionals as well, just packing on the traps. Especially Lost Wind and Compulse are very versatile in this format. Being chainable and the fact that Lost Wind survives all of your back row removal makes it a super strong contender at the moment. Obviously it doesn't save you from the Cosmic Cyclone, but that card has also gone down in popularity because Salamangreat has gone down in popularity. For the 3rd deck here, we see a Salamangreat Resurgence. This one's pretty interesting. There's just the one Phantasme, but there's double DD Crow in the main deck. Otherwise, fairly standard. We see Triple Buffalo and Debug being played so much just to boost the consistency and a heavy hand trap lineup to deal with all of the rogue decks. And then here we have the 1st place from the Michigan Regional. This is a True Draco list. That's pretty interesting given that we don't typically see True Draco ever take 1st place. Certainly in recent formats. It's been a while since it's kind of been a popular 1st place choice, but we do often see it make top cuts, so very interesting to see that you can take this deck and pilot it to 1st place. Obviously having Triple Judgment helps out with that quite a lot. So here I've got the popular trades from the card market website, and you can see we've got the trending cards from the last week of competitive trading. So this is a European-based website, but it does match very largely with the US websites as well, like TCG Player. So I just wanted to take a quick look at this. You can see IP Masquerena, a really popular choice as a traded card amongst the European community, certainly, and I believe it topped, it came 1st place in last weekend's TCG Player top traded cards as well. So really popular choice, being moved all over the market at the moment because people don't actually know how many they need. You generally just need 1 copy, but if you need 1, your friend probably needs 1 as well, so there's a lot of people picking this up. And you can see a lot of the tech choices that we mentioned are also featuring within this top traded list. Things like the Lost Winds, the Super Poly. One really interesting one for me is actually the featuring of Call by the Grave. It's the kind of card that has been dropped from the majority of main decks that we've seen over the course of the month. So it's quite interesting that people are trading this quite a lot. Clearly there's a lot of uncertainty in the market about whether it's a super viable card at the moment. Potentially as the format develops we might see it pick up in popularity depending on what actually happens, but based on the fact that we don't have a new ban list and it hasn't been a popular choice for recent YCSs, I'm gonna call it now and say that Cold Weather Gravy is not gonna be one of the most popular tech choices for the month within the high-level competitive events. Potentially we'll see it used quite a lot at regional level events where people are a little bit more scared and they're trying to have more ability to interrupt the hand traps, but it doesn't do anything against Nibiru, it doesn't do anything against Imperm, so I don't think this is going to have the biggest impact over the format. Let's move on to upcoming releases. So there's just one important release from the month of November, that is the Mystic Fighters booster set that will be coming out. This has some interesting stuff in it. We've got the, I always forget the names, the Dragon Maids, we've got the Generators coming out in this set, and we've got the Mathmechs as well, so some interesting stuff. It's not super meta defining, it's not something that we can expect will be like topping all of the events, but you can expect it to appear in your regional events. In terms of upcoming major events, there's YCS Lima this weekend, that's a 3v3 event in Peru, YCS Pasadena towards the end of the month, and then YCS Milan right on the final weekend of the month. So expect analysis from all of these events to feature in the next video as well, provided we can get our hands on that 3v3 competitive data. That's going to be an interesting one. How do you think I should incorporate that information into a video like this? In terms of UK player performance, you can see a subsection here. So I've taken all of the players who've performed well and made it into Top Cut from the past month. We can see at the top of this list is Michael Ashworth taking 3 top spots from the month, closely followed by Luke Lennon with 2 there. Now we do have a slightly incomplete data set, so if you think that potentially you've had more top spots than 3 from the past month and you're UK based, then let me know and I'll stick it in the comments and make an edit to the video. But at the moment it looks like Team Shift is really dominating the current UK TCG format. They won last month's version of the player performance, and they've won it this month as well, so let's see whether or not Team Shift come ahead in the December season. We'll just have to wait and see for that one. And then in terms of the future of the forecast, if you have any events that you're going to where you can get full information of players and decks that make Top Cut, please send them in to me. You can contact me via the Facebook page, search for Zach Carnage, which is the old channel name, but Facebook will not allow me to update the webpage name, so that's what I'm stuck with. If you can't get in contact via Facebook, do feel free to head into the comments section and just give me submissions via the comments section. I will need to verify them, so if you have like any access to like Top Cut breakdowns, just the list of standings from the event, just send that over in some way and I'll take a quick look at that as well, so we can verify all this information, get the data in, and move forward with the forecast for the December season, and try and predict what's going to happen in the coming months. Thanks very much for watching this video. Let me know if you have any comments or suggestions that you'd like to make. Leave those comments in the section down below, and feel free to make any submissions via the Facebook page, via the YouTube channel, and feel free to get in touch, and I'll see you guys in the next one.